This is Guweiz, an artist most of you probably know because he's super popular, and today's the day. I'm listening to your requests, so here's a new study time episode where I'll break down his style, his approach to digital painting, and then of course, try my hand at a painting study to see how well or how bad I can mimic his style. I'm Marc. I used to be a senior artist at Blizzard Entertainment a long time ago. Now I teach art for a living. But there's always more to learn with art. So Guweiz is an artist that I've been following for roughly a decade, and I really didn't want to make this video for the simple reason that his art scares me. There's always so much going on, and then when I see a painting like this, all I can think about is the amount of time that he must have spent on it. And then I start to shake with anxiety. Just kidding. I'm not scared. You're scared. Check this out. What a madman. So here are a few of my favorite pieces that I wanted to investigate. I think there are like 7 to 8 main ingredients to his style that make these certified Guweiz pieces. The first one maybe isn't contributing to his style per se, I guess, but the character has to be a pretty lady with outfit designs that are often inspired from the Chinese culture. No males though, girls only. Not that I can judge. And I love the way he uses fusion a lot in his designs, an art principle that I covered in a recent video where interest is basically generated by combining opposite things together, like opposite colors, like warm and cool colors, high contrast in values, opposite themes, opposite types of materials, etc. And then the second ingredient to his style has to be the general mood that's always pretty dark, like a bad weather, desaturated colors, but all of that while maintaining a heavy focus on the lighting. I mean, look at that. See how the light helps to frame the characters? Sometimes there'll be like shadows against a bright background. Sometimes it's the opposite. It's the most important ingredient to his style, I think, and probably the hardest to replicate. Dark alleys, dark rooms, rain. To me, it suggests that the characters have a hard life, something that helps them be more likable, maybe, like we can kind of relate to them, and that's deep. In third, I have his rendering style, which is mostly realistic with a lifelike use of values, colors, and textures, but it's never fully rendered. He leaves his paintings in this quasi-finished state that seems polished, but isn't when you stare a bit longer. Still though, if we look at the hair, it's clear that photorealism is what he's going for. I mean, look at all those details. A lot of artists go the opposite route where they try to give the impression of detail with as few brushstrokes as possible, but I guess he's not cheap with his brushstrokes. He seems to place less value in each individual stroke, so if you look closely, there's a lot of wasted brushstrokes. It's a less strict workflow that I actually like a lot too. It can be super frustrating as a beginner, but with experience this becomes super fun. For the fourth ingredient in his style, we have to mention storytelling. His illustrations tend to mostly feature slides of life, almost mundane moments in the lives of his characters, in familiar places, but only at first glance, because there's always a subtle element of fantasy present. Everything looks normal at first, but then there's something that reminds us that his characters are in some sort of alternate universe. Right, the next ones are a bit more technical, but very style defining. So as a fifth ingredient, I'd add that his values are always incredibly high in contrast, with very dark shadows and bright highlights. See how quickly it can go from dark to very bright and dark again? And jumping to the colors, I think the best way to describe his palette is yellow gray or like orange gray. His colors are typically more on the cool side, but from what I've seen, he doesn't actually use many cool colors, like if any. He'll go real saturated when it comes to the warm colors, but then he'll actually let the grays take on the role of the cool colors through what I call color relativity. It's a cool characteristic of the color gray specifically, where it can take on both the role of a warm or cool color depending on the surrounding colors. And then he shades with black, as opposed to having a variation in the colors from highlights to shadows like many artists do, myself included, like you can see here. Like if you look at how the color picker moves around the hue bar as I color pick. But then looking at his hair instead, we can see that the hue doesn't really change. It's simple in a way. Just pick any color and add black to darken it. I'm exaggerating, of course, but the colors are so desaturated that doing it this way will actually work for most things. Except maybe when he paints skin. Again, very realistic, very little artsy exaggerations. And those I would say are staples of his style, but maybe here are a few other things real quick worth mentioning before we look at his brushes. Like his painting technique that I would describe as the ADHD method, jumping from one thing to the next until everything is rendered enough to basically call it done. It's a common approach for artists with a painterly style, like I'll do this a lot too. It's definitely harder to mimic though, unless you've done this many times before. The method is just pretty chaotic versus like the more straightforward ones that I often share on the channel, for example. I wouldn't say this is a good method to use if you're a beginner, but regardless, you'll see how to do it in just a few minutes when I tackle my painting study. Real quick before that though, another interesting detail about his process is that he mixes in a lot of photos in his paintings. It's digital painting with a dash of photo bashing. Very similar to how we would approach it within a game studio, by the way. It's a bit more time efficient, like you just need a rough block out of the shapes in your background, and then you can slap this part of a photo right in, paint over it real quick to make the brushstrokes match the rest of the painting, otherwise it looks terrible, and then there you go. At a quick glance, this feels pretty detailed, but it didn't take nearly as much time as if we had painted it all by hand. And I think it's really interesting too how he'll leave some very rough brushstrokes for important details in the foreground, like right here, and then go balls deep in detail for stuff in the far distance. I find myself staring at the details all around the characters rather than at the characters themselves for the most part, because my eyes are just attracted to all of these small, intricate pockets of details over here, over there. So even though this is a character illustration, the background has so much going on, it feels just as important. There's so much to look at, like so much depth. Look at this. Most people don't zoom in like that, so they probably miss it. Ugh, this is making me want to paint. First, though, let's quickly take a look at some of the brushes that he uses. Except, I don't have his brushes, but that's not a problem. We just need to zoom in a bit and investigate those brush strokes. You could probably get identical results if you had identical skills using just like 2 to 3 brushes like these. He does use a bit of texture, but it's often this small like splatter effect that you can get easily with a custom brush. And this brush I'm sure gets a lot of mileage because you can see it used for so many things. You can also spot some rake brush strokes here, some more basic hard edge brushes, some less hard like we have here. But interestingly enough, one thing that I can't really see are the effects of a smudge brush. He apparently does not smudge, at least not that I can see. And I used to be the same, purposely leaving visible brush strokes as part of the style, but now I can't live without it, so that stood out to me. Most of these brushes are actually very similar to my own. Like I didn't have to create any new brush for my study that I'm about to work on in this next chapter. So anyways, if you're curious, my brushes are available for download with the link in the video description. It's free, bro. And while you're in my Cube Brush store, you should check out my full art education program that I call YTartschool for digital artists. It's everything that you would need to be able to do exactly what I'm doing here, understanding everything that goes into a distinct style, and then all the knowledge that you would ever need to be able to paint it yourself, and eventually your own style. The spring sale is almost over, so right now is the best time to join our amazing art gang of over 27,000 registered students and start to seriously level up your skills along them in our private Discord server. And you can take advantage of this huge discount for about another week, but make sure you check down below to know exactly when the sale ends. What are you waiting for? All right, back to the video. Now let's see what I can do equipped with all of this new knowledge of his style. Can I make a Guweiz style painting? We'll find out. I'm scared. I'm starting with this sketch here. I wanted to create a mundane moment in the life of my character to begin. So this is what I got. A demon girl about to wash off the blood of her enemies from her clothes in a dark, moody bathroom at night. And there are no clean line arts to be found here. Instead, we're looking for a rough sketch that just gives me an idea of the composition. The more progress we'll make, the harder it'll be to change things. So the sketch has to be the final composition or like as close to it as possible. And looking at his own process, I think this is probably good enough for me to move on to the rough values. So I'm just going to block those in to get an idea of the light in my scene, not zooming in too much at this stage to keep the focus on the overall illustration and not the details just yet. I don't have much here, but I'm starting to get a much clearer mental image of what this will become. That's usually the time where he would move on, like ready to start laying down some low saturation colors with selections and color balance. I'll try keeping the palette mostly desaturated and count on the lights to bring in some colors. Again, we don't have much at this point, but it's enough for me to see the vision. So I'm going to get the rendering started. This was a long process where I tackled the character first, since she's the most important part of the painting. But just like he does, I also tend to just jump around the scene, like rendering something over here, rendering something over there, just randomly until this starts to look like something. And throughout, I had absolutely no layer management going on here. I just barely kept the layers for the background below those of the characters, but that's about it. Chaotic methods usually come with chaotic layer stacks. That's just how it is. Now, jumping ahead a bit again, I've made some more progress on the render, and this is starting to feel like the mood that I had in mind. I'm not used to drawing darker scenes, so this was a fun challenge. And at this point, all the key ingredients are there, but I'm missing a lot of polish and some interesting details in the background to improve the storytelling. Right now, it's kind of lacking. So maybe we can add some clothes hanging to make it more obvious that's where she washes them. The mood is also a bit too colorful, so let's try to knock down some of that saturation and make it feel more gray overall. It's better, I think. And I'm missing a lot of texture though when I look back at his work, so I think I can start to whip out the texturing brushes now for stuff like this. His characters always wear a lot of cool bling too, so I added some to mine as well. Again, props are a great way to improve the storytelling in a piece. I added a few bugs flying around her lamp as well, since her window's open. What is she doing? A bit more rendering, and some more bugs creeping around. I felt like this slide was a bit empty, and that was throwing up the composition for me, so I added a TV up there behind the shirts. I also gave her a tail, and then with some more rendering, here's what I ended up with. That was a lot of work. I think I'm at the 20-hour mark at this point, much more than I usually spend on paintings nowadays, but that was pretty fun. It's been a while since I took enough time aside to really work on the details. How do you think it came out? Honestly, to me this feels Guweiz inspired, but it doesn't look like a Guweiz piece. Maybe more of a hybrid between our styles. I think I over-rendered it. Another attempt would probably help, but as it is, I still got a lot out of it, and I hope you did as well. So now, what are we thinking for the next study? Shoot me your suggestions below, and I'll see you next week.